So hi, I'm Leisha. I live in Singapore. My girlfriend has asked me to put together a short video, of what the current situation is like here. So I've lived in Singapore for 23 years and I'm actually a permanent resident here. I was in Singapore during SARS, and the experience of SARS greatly impacted Singapore at the time, and I think the Singapore government has been preparing for another serious public health event since that time. And as most people in the world would be aware, Singapore is handling this outbreak extremely well. I think we have been in different phases of trying to manage the outbreak for, I think, at least 6 weeks, perhaps even longer. Certainly at my work, I actually work for a German bank. My work, we began working split teams about 6 weeks ago, and we are now fully work from home unless we have, as of I think on Thursday last week, we are now working, all working from home, unless we have an essential role where that requires us to be in the office. So really, last week I was working from home. It was my team was work from home, and I guess I will keep working from home until the situation stabilizes. So living in Singapore, I mean, they're very serious about the measures that they implement, and it becomes law very, very quickly. So for instance, social distancing really came into effect last week, and very soon after was followed by warnings of criminal ramifications if you don't follow the social distancing requirements that the government has put in place. So everything from people here do as they're told. There is no flexibility. If you get caught disobeying the rules and requirements of the government, then you are going to suffer the consequences. So, in the press, they are very open about people who have ignored stay-at-home notices and ignored medical certificates and ventured outside of their home, and they've been deported. They've had their residency status terminated, and if you are Singaporean and you disobey the rules and requirements, you would be, there are jail sentences and potential canings as well. So generally speaking, people here, the government puts in place measures to protect, citizens as a whole. There's no such thing as individual rights, really, in Singapore, and particularly at times like this. Everybody is working collectively for the whole society, and, you must do what you're asked to do. So that makes it a very safe place to live. The other thing is that I think being a resident here, that gives me great comfort, is that if I did get sick, the medical facilities that are here are more than capable of coping with, escalated cases. So currently, now saying all of that, surprisingly, in the early days, it seemed like Singapore was really handling the increased number of cases, but what we're seeing now is a lot of Singaporeans returning home, and returning home with CV. So we've had a real spike. We currently have over 800 cases, I think, looking at the press. The last couple of days, 75 new cases every day. I understand 600 of those, 600 of the 800 cases, something like that, don't quote me, are currently either in hospitals or in care facilities where they are quarantined. People are not allowed to go home to recuperate. They have to stay in isolated care, and they're not allowed to leave until they test negative twice, is what I understand. And of those, 600 people that are currently being cared for, my understanding is there is about 20 people that are in ICU. So that's fantastic, because I'm sure, if things do get worse, that they have enough ICU units to look after and manage the cases that are coming through. And they announced sadly that the third person died of CV. So that's kind of, I think, what it's, what I'm experiencing. Care facilities where they are quarantined. People are not allowed to go home to recuperate. They have to stay in isolated care, and they're not allowed to leave until they test negative twice, is what I understand. And of those, 600 people that are currently being cared for, my understanding is there is about 20 people that are in ICU. So that's fantastic, because I'm sure, if things do get worse, that they have enough ICU units to look after and manage the cases that are coming through. And they announced sadly that the third person died of CV. So that's kind of, I think, what it's, what I'm experiencing. I feel very confident that I'm in a country that is taking leadership, showing leadership, managing the situation, making decisions that are right for the community as a whole, not necessarily for the individual. I know that if I did get sick, that I'd be well looked after. So that's on the plus side. On the negative side, I am, this sort of the escalation, I guess, particularly in the West, in Italy and the UK and the US. And I'm Australian. So I think the last 3 weeks, things really developed. And being, really busy at work, and I really unable to take any time off, so focused and stressed about trying to, do my job. My children are actually in boarding school in Sydney, and very sadly, I am essentially now separated from them, and it is, personally, it's a horrible situation. It's a horrible feeling. My children's school in Sydney closed last Monday, and which means, because they're boarding in Australia, they've had to go and stay with my parents. So my children are currently with my mother, and if I talk about this too much, I'm going to get very upset, but they are e-learning at school for another couple of weeks, and then they were due to be coming back to Singapore to have their Easter holiday with me in about 2.5 weeks' time, and that's looking not likely. Singapore Airlines has already cancelled their flights, and I can't see that changing. I'm just trying to be positive that, if we can get this under control, that I'll be able to see them, shortly, not much longer than, I guess, the Easter holidays. So in terms of my children, my boys are 12 and 14. And my youngest has just gone off to boarding school, so my 12-year-old. So this would have been his first holiday home, and I miss both of them. But I know that he's really sort of struggling. That he would like to come home, and spend time, in his room, playing with his things, seeing his mum. And, you know, that makes me really sad. So my mother has Addison's disease, so she has absolutely no immunity. And of course, I worry, you know, children sort of may be carriers of CV, and they, I guess, living with my mother and my mother looking after them, she's putting herself at risk. And, you know, that really worries me as well. So, I mean, I'm separated from my family. I can't see. All the flights have been cancelled. Singapore government will not let me leave. If I leave, I will risk losing my residency status here, and I may never be able to return. And this is where my job is. I'm a single mom. I'm, you know, working to basically raise my boys and to you know, pay for their education. Actually, I just work to look after my kids. So, you know, personally, this is a really rough time. I think in my head, I keep thinking, well, I wouldn't have ordinarily seen them until around the 9th of April, and let's just hope that it's not much longer after that. I'll have to reassess in about 4 weeks, you know, what my situation is and whether or not I can continue to not have access to my children. And you know, so personally, it's a really hard time. Now, saying that, in Singapore, I have to, this is, you know, we have, I'm not alone. So if you want to cut this and say this again, I just want to say this better. You know, my situation is not, you know, near as bad as many of the foreign workers that are in Singapore at the present time. You know, I know many of the foreign domestic helpers, the female ladies that come from Philippines, Indonesia. You know, there are hundreds, tens of thousands of Filipino workers in Singapore who only get to go home every 2 years, if they're lucky, to see their families and their children. And many were going back to see, you know, my neighbour's helper, for instance. She was supposed to return to the Philippines to see her son graduate, so she has given up her life and her family life and to come and work in Singapore so that she could support her child through their education and just to give them a better life. And now she can't go back to see her son graduate. And I'm hearing many other foreign domestic workers go through the same scenario. So here am I feeling bad, you know, not being able to see my kids. I saw my children very early February. It's not quite April yet, so really I shouldn't be complaining when you hear about these poor women who sacrifice everything, you know, to give their children a better life, and they can't get home at the moment to, you know, to see them graduate or just to see them for the first time in 2 years. Imagine that. And then the same would go, there's hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands, I don't want to get in trouble for exaggerating, tens of thousands of, you know, foreign workers that work on building sites, you know, all the public works here, you know, they have very basic lives. They are just working to send money home to, you know, Bangladesh, you know, to many of the poorer countries in ASEAN, to try to give their families a better life as well. And in many ways, you know, they are completely blocked off from normal life, you know, living in dormitories, etc. So, you know, they're higher risk, I guess, because they're living in communal facilities. And, you know, so which is dangerous, if I think. I'm sure they're not getting much extra care than they usually do. They work really hard, really long hours, a lot of them outside in the incredible heat in Singapore. And you know, they too are missing out on opportunities to go home and see their families. So, I mean, I think that's definitely puts in perspective, for me anyway, So what else do I want to say? I mean, one thing that really annoys me about this is my landlord. You know, I would say I've lost, just this week, my landlord sent a notice around saying that they've closed the gym and the pool and all the common facilities in our condo. I mean, we're all stuck at home working. I think we're well aware of the social distancing measures. So far, there is no evidence to suggest that coronavirus is transmitted through, or COVID-19 is transmitted through swimming pools. And certainly if they're chlorinated and they're clean, it should be okay, shouldn't it? I don't know. Anyway, so that's my, one little escape is really to get out and go for a swim each day, and enjoy just some fresh air. And now that's been taken away, so that really annoys me. What else can I tell you? In the early days of this virus, like everywhere else in the world, Singaporeans and all the residents of Singapore were guilty of stockpiling, the same as going on in the rest of the world. Toilet paper was the item of choice at that time. But I went to the supermarket yesterday, and everything is back on the shelves. We can now get all everything that we need. I bought fresh fruit and vegetables, and I bought chicken yesterday, and I managed to find some tinned tomatoes, which I couldn't get the week before. That seems to be a popular item as well. But generally speaking, yesterday being a Saturday, I was expecting the supermarkets to be really busy, but they weren't. And people are really only going as and when they need to. I mean, it's very orderly. So that's great. But the funny thing is, like, you hear of all of these social distancing requirements, etc. But I live across the road from a local estate, where a lot of Singaporeans live in a housing development, HDBs, they're called HDBs, fantastic places. Underneath the HDBs is usually food courts and wet markets. And I popped over to the wet market yesterday to get my flowers, which I do every Saturday because it's life's a luxury. And it was so busy. There is no social distancing going on in the wet markets, I can tell you that. So I don't know what that means. Some people are not concerned about the virus, but I could, it was quite concerning. I live across the road from a local estate, where a lot of Singaporeans live in a housing development, HDBs, they're called HDBs, fantastic places. Underneath the HDBs is usually food courts and wet markets. And I popped over to the wet market yesterday to get my flowers, which I do every Saturday because it's life's a luxury. And it was so busy. There is no social distancing going on in the wet markets, I can tell you that. So I don't know what that means. Some people are not concerned about the virus, but I could, it was quite concerning. The government has actually required that fixed seating, if to spread people out through restaurants, etc. And that certainly wasn't being adhered to in the wet market across the road. So that was a bit surprising. You can now, I also went to buy, because my mother asked me to get her some face masks and some hand sanitizer, and that was available in the chemist, albeit a little bit more expensive than the first time I bought them, but nonetheless available. So I haven't, in terms of seeing my friends, really the last week I haven't really seen anyone. I think most people are practicing social distancing. I had a dinner last night with a friend. We did it virtually. Actually, my friend is on stay-at-home notice, and he's in a hotel on Sentosa. He is he's not been put there by the government, but as of this week, anyone that is returning from overseas is being moved straight from the airport to a hotel for 14 days. And the hotel where my friend is staying is now one of those hotels. And I'm actually, I have to say, it's, it's very frustrating because, they're really treating my friend like he is in quarantine and not on a stay-at-home notice. So he has no liberties whatsoever. They are watching him like a hawk, and nobody's allowed to visit the hotel unless they're there because of the government. Actually, that's something I should say. So I know a few people now that have been on stay-at-home notices and various orders from the government. And again, this is why you feel so safe in Singapore. It's absolutely amazing. So if you are on stay-at-home notice, someone will ring you 3 times a day, and you have to take your temperature and you have to tell them what your temperature is. They can ring you on FaceTime or on video conference to make sure that you are where you say you are. As time has gone on, they now have tracking devices. So my friend, who's in quarantine at Sentosa, when he landed, the immigration agents put a tracking device on his phone so they know where he is at all times and can monitor his movements. There is no, stay-at-home notice is, you might as well be under quarantine, is extremely serious here. And I think I said earlier, if you're on a stay-at-home notice for 14 days, you are monitored. If you're on a quarantine, you are monitored. If you're on an MC, if you're on a 5-day MC, you cannot leave your house. If you leave your house and you're on MC, there are serious repercussions in Singapore. So, it's not nice if it's you and you're on MC and you feel quite well and you want to go over to the shops, but if you get caught, you are in serious trouble. I actually read today that someone has had their passport cancelled. So I'm trying to imagine what that means. If you're a Singaporean citizen, you're not allowed to hold dual nationality. And what happens if you get your passport cancelled? Do you become an alien and but that is what is happening here. So a man travelled to Indonesia by ferry, and he broke his 14-day stay-at-home notice, and he has had his citizenship cancelled. So goodness gracious, I don't know. As I said, I don't know what that would mean unless he had held another passport, which I hope he does. But that's how serious things are here. So I think that's all I can tell you. Nice, I didn't cry when I was speaking about my children because, that's probably, it's really scary, when you think, you don't know when will be the next time that you'll see them. Hopefully this will pass as SARS did, in time, and then we'll get back to normal, and hopefully I'll see my children really soon. So anyway, hopefully I didn't waffle on too much. You can cut and edit what you need, and but hopefully there's material in there that you can use. Anyway, whoever you are, you're Sylvia's friend. Goodbye.